Emma Blake had always been the picture of success, a thriving career in marketing, a beautiful home, and a marriage that, at least on the surface, seemed perfect. At 32, she had worked hard for everything she had. Her husband, David, was the charming and charismatic man who had captured her heart years ago. He was a lawyer, confident and polished, with a reputation for being a hard worker. Together, they made an impressive couple, the kind people admired at dinner parties and social gatherings. Their life together appeared flawless. Emma and David shared their ups and downs, but there was always love and respect in their marriage, or so Emma believed. Their friends often envied the couple's deep connection, and Emma was proud of the partnership they had built. She had a close circle of friends, but none as close as Lily, her best friend since college. Lily had been there for her through thick and thin, and their bond had only grown stronger over the years. The three of them, Emma, David, and Lily, were inseparable, often going on weekend getaways and spending holidays together. But recently, Emma had started noticing subtle changes in David's behavior. He had become more distant, spending more nights working late or going out with clients. He no longer responded to her texts as quickly, and there was a certain coldness that had crept into their conversations. Emma dismissed it at first, convincing herself it was just stress from work or the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. She told herself she was just being paranoid, as she had no real reason to suspect anything was wrong. Yet, something in her gut told her otherwise. She noticed how David had started being overly protective of his phone, keeping it out of her sight and sometimes leaving it unattended with the screen face down. When she asked about his late nights, his responses were vague, almost rehearsed. She started to wonder if her intuition was right or if she was simply overthinking it. Lily, ever the supportive friend, was there to listen to Emma's concerns. Lily always reassured Emma that everything was fine, that maybe David was just stressed from work, or maybe they just needed to reconnect. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She had been married long enough to know when things were off, and every instinct told her that David's affection had begun to shift. Then there was the strange behavior between David and Lily. Recently, Emma had caught them in quiet, private conversations, their tone a bit too intimate, their laughs a little too knowing. She brushed it off, telling herself it was nothing. After all, Lily was her best friend, she wouldn't do anything to hurt her. But as time passed, Emma began to feel an increasing unease, as though the foundation of her marriage was slowly crumbling, and she couldn't pinpoint why. Emma had no idea that her life, her trust, and everything she knew about her marriage were about to shatter in the most devastating way possible. The calm before the storm was about to break, and nothing would ever be the same. It had been a long day for Emma. After a stressful week of work, she had finally managed to clear her schedule and decided to return home early to surprise David. He had been working late almost every night for the past few weeks, and Emma had been feeling the strain of their growing distance. Maybe tonight, she thought, they could talk, reconnect, and perhaps bring some warmth back into their relationship. With her mind full of plans to rekindle their bond, Emma opened the door to their shared home. The house was unusually quiet, and for a moment, she felt a strange sense of peace. She placed her bag down, called out for David, but there was no reply. It wasn't uncommon for him to be in his office or upstairs, but something felt off. She walked through the house, the silence pressing against her as she moved toward the living room. That's when she heard it. The faint sound of voices, muffled but unmistakable. Her heart skipped a beat, her senses suddenly heightened as she listened. At first, she thought it was nothing, just the sound of an idle conversation between David and someone else. But then, she recognized the voice. It was Lily's voice. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she felt the all-too-familiar pang of unease settle in her chest. She froze for a moment, unsure of whether to walk into the room or retreat quietly to avoid an awkward situation. But the tension in the air pushed her forward. She wanted to know what was going on. What had David been doing? Why were they so engaged in conversation at this hour? Slowly, she approached the living room door, each step heavy with uncertainty. And then, as she stood just beyond the threshold, she saw them. There, on the couch, were David and Lily, entangled in an intimate embrace. David, her husband, was kissing Lily, her best friend, passionately, his hand pressed against her back, drawing her in closer. Lily, usually so composed and reserved, had her eyes closed, her arms wrapped around David as if nothing in the world mattered except this moment. The sight was surreal, unreal even, as Emma stood frozen in the doorway, unable to tear her gaze away from the scene before her. Her mind was racing, the reality of what she was seeing crashing into her like a tidal wave. The truth felt like it was both too much to bear and not possible at the same time. Was this really happening? Was her life really shattering in this instant? Her heart felt as though it had stopped beating. Every shred of trust, every ounce of love she had for both of them, evaporated in that one breathless moment. The quiet intimacy between David and Lily mocked the years she had spent with them, building a life she thought was founded on loyalty and love. Now, it was a fragile house of cards ready to collapse. It wasn't until Lily opened her eyes and saw Emma standing there, her mouth slightly agape and her face drained of color, that the illusion broke. "Emma!" Lily gasped, her eyes wide with horror as she immediately pulled away from David, her face flushing with guilt. David, too, jerked back, a look of shock flashing across his face. But it quickly turned to defensiveness, as if he could somehow justify what was happening. "Emma, he started, but Emma couldn't hear him anymore. Her heart was thundering in her chest, drowning out his words. "Don't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She could feel the tears welling in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not now. Not in front of them. Emma turned on her heel, walking quickly toward the door. Her mind was in turmoil, she couldn't think clearly, couldn't make sense of what was happening. She needed air. She needed space. She couldn't be in that house, in that moment, surrounded by the two people who had destroyed her. As she reached for the door, she could hear David's voice calling after her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't face him, not yet. Not when her world had just been turned upside down. She slammed the door behind her as she stepped out into the cool night air, her breath shaky as she tried to calm herself. The world around her seemed distant, like she was living in someone else's nightmare. She paced in the yard, unsure of what to do, where to go. She was angry, devastated, and above all, completely betrayed. Everything she had built with David, everything she had shared with Lily, was a lie. The trust she had given them was shattered beyond repair. As Emma stood there, struggling to collect her thoughts, she realized something: she wasn't going to let this define her. No, this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The beginning of her reclaiming her power, her life, and her dignity. She would make them both pay for what they had done. She wouldn't let them get away with this betrayal. Emma's mind began to churn with a quiet, seething determination. They would regret ever betraying her trust. She would make sure of it. And in that moment, Emma knew exactly what she had to do. Emma's heart was still pounding from the confrontation, but her mind was sharp. She had spent hours in the quiet of the night, processing the betrayal, her emotions shifting from heartbreak to raw anger. As she sat in her car, parked in the driveway, her fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly. Tears had come and gone, but now a sense of clarity settled over her. She had been wronged, not just by her husband but by the one person she had trusted the most, her best friend, Lily. They both had shattered her world in one agonizing moment. But Emma wasn't going to fall apart, she wasn't going to let them see her suffer. Instead, she would rise above the pain and take control of her future. She needed a plan, a cold, calculated plan, to ensure that David and Lily felt the full weight of their betrayal. Revenge wasn't about chaos or impulsive decisions, it was about strategy, precision, and emotional power. Emma wasn't going to allow herself to be the victim in this story. She would become the architect of their downfall. The first step in Emma's revenge was to gain control of her own emotions and understand the full scope of what had happened. David had betrayed her, but so had Lily. The trust she had placed in both of them was gone, and it wasn't something that could be easily repaired. But there was one thing that had always been true: Emma was smart. She knew how to keep calm under pressure and how to use the resources available to her. She spent the next day gathering information, quietly, methodically. She revisited old emails and messages on her shared accounts with David. She wasn't interested in the details of their affair at first. Instead, she sought out the financial records. Emma had always been careful with her finances, maintaining a separate account for herself in addition to the joint account she shared with David. But now, with the truth out, she began tracking David's spending habits, looking for discrepancies that might reveal hidden activities. She found them. There were significant amounts of money that had gone toward business expenses that Emma never knew about. Large withdrawals from ATMs, some made in places she didn't recognize, late-night transfers to unknown accounts, and payments for lavish gifts and vacations. All of it pointed to one thing: David's financial dishonesty. He had been keeping secrets from her, and Emma wasn't going to let him get away with it. Once Emma had all the information she needed, she began her first phase of revenge, hitting David where it would hurt the most: his career and finances. Emma wasn't going to let him continue living a life of luxury built on lies. She contacted the bank, posing as a representative, and requested a full audit of their joint account. With the right credentials, she could convince them to dig deeper into the financial discrepancies. It wouldn't take much for the bank to uncover a pattern of spending that seemed suspicious, enough to trigger an investigation into possible fraud. David, she knew, had always prided himself on his professional reputation. A financial scandal would not only ruin his career but would make it impossible for him to regain the trust of his colleagues or clients. Emma's next move was to contact one of David's business associates, someone she knew well from the few social events she'd attended with him. Emma played the role of the concerned wife, expressing worries about David's recent behavior. She suggested that he might be involved in something questionable, asking if the associate had noticed any unusual behavior. The associate, eager to gossip and concerned about his own professional ties to David, unwittingly gave Emma more ammunition. Emma now had a solid foundation to expose David's fraudulent activity, and she had no intention of keeping quiet. The next part of the plan was aimed at Lily. Emma had been patient, pretending to forgive her best friend, all the while plotting her downfall. She was no longer interested in salvaging their friendship. Lily had crossed a line that was unforgivable. Emma knew exactly where Lily's vulnerability lay: her job. Lily worked at a prestigious PR agency, and Emma had long known about the professional pressure she faced to maintain her image. Emma began to subtly plant seeds of doubt in Lily's career, without ever directly confronting her. Emma contacted a former colleague of Lily's, someone who had been unceremoniously pushed out of the agency a few years prior. The colleague had been a whistleblower on some shady practices within the company, but Emma hadn't taken the time to dig into it until now. She used this connection to anonymously leak damaging information to the agency's HR department. She didn't need to make direct accusations, just enough to spark an internal investigation. The company had a zero-tolerance policy when it came to personal relationships interfering with professional responsibilities, and Emma knew Lily's affair with David could easily be spun into a violation of workplace ethics. As Lily's world began to unravel, Emma remained the picture of calm. She knew that Lily would eventually crack under the pressure. She had been a willing participant in this affair, after all. She had been the one to betray Emma first, and now she would have to deal with the consequences of her actions. After weeks of carefully executed plans, the final confrontation was imminent. Emma knew it was time to face David and Lily, but she wasn't going to approach them as the broken woman they expected her to be. No, she was going to walk into that room with her head held high, confident and in control. She invited both David and Lily to her house for a discussion, making sure they didn't suspect anything unusual. As they walked into the living room, the tension was palpable. David, disheveled and exhausted from the unraveling of his life, tried to act surprised, but Emma could see the fear in his eyes. Lily, on the other hand, was nervous, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. She had already been informed about the rumors surrounding her career, and Emma knew she was already feeling the heat. Emma calmly revealed everything she had done, how she had exposed David's financial misconduct, how she had orchestrated the leak about Lily's affair and destroyed her career. There was no escaping the truth. They had been caught, not just emotionally, but professionally and financially. Emma wasn't just taking revenge, she was reclaiming her power. As David and Lily scrambled to explain themselves, Emma looked at them with nothing but disdain. "This is what happens when you betray me," she said coldly. "You thought you could have everything. Now, you both get to watch it all fall apart." And with that, Emma stood up, her decision made. She wasn't just walking away from the wreckage of her marriage. She was stepping into her new life, stronger and more empowered than ever before. The days following Emma's strategic move were filled with a quiet intensity. She watched as everything she had set into motion began to take shape, each move inching her closer to her final goal, exposing David and Lily for the betrayal they had inflicted upon her. The cold, calculated revenge wasn't about bringing them immediate pain, it was about dismantling the world they had carefully built upon lies, exposing them in a way that would make their downfall inevitable. Emma's first strike was at David's professional life. Her quiet manipulation of the situation with his business clients had begun to show immediate results. A few key clients, who had always been loyal to David's legal practice, were pulling out of deals or stalling on long-term contracts. Their reasons were subtle but clear: no one wanted to be associated with a man whose integrity was now in question. Emma had planted the seed of doubt with just a few carefully worded questions during casual conversations with some of David's colleagues. She had played the concerned wife, asking innocently if they had noticed any unusual behavior. Those seeds of doubt had blossomed into a whisper campaign, leading to murmurs of misconduct. Then came the call from the bank. Emma had spent hours poring over their joint financial statements and had uncovered irregularities: money that David had siphoned off into private accounts, transfers to offshore investments, and unexplained withdrawals. With the right information, she anonymously tipped off a colleague of David's at the bank, who then conducted an internal investigation. The findings were damning. David's financial dealings were exposed to the point of scandal. His reputation, built on years of hard work, now stood on the verge of collapse. And just like that, the man who had always prided himself on his business acumen was facing the full wrath of an investigation that was bound to ruin him. Emma didn't let herself feel sympathy for him, not now. She knew this was the only way to make him truly understand the consequences of his actions. And as the pressure mounted on David, Emma felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. He had no idea how far she had gone to ensure his fall from grace. While David's career spiraled into chaos, Emma turned her attention to Lily, the woman who had not only betrayed her trust but had also shared a deep, personal connection with Emma. It wasn't enough to simply expose the affair. No, Emma wanted to make sure Lily felt the same loss, the loss of everything she had worked for. Emma knew that Lily's career was built on her connections and reputation. One slip-up, and everything could crumble. And Emma intended to be that slip-up. Using her network of contacts, Emma had quietly leaked the details of Lily's affair to HR, not in an obvious way, but in a manner that would force the company to investigate without a direct accusation. She didn't need to make the affair the primary issue, she just had to suggest that Lily's judgment and professionalism were compromised. The company's zero-tolerance policy on workplace relationships quickly became her weapon. The HR department began to probe, and soon enough, whispers of the affair reached the top brass. Lily was called in for a meeting with HR, and when she left, her face was pale, her steps unsure. Her once promising career was now hanging by a thread. Emma knew that Lily would be reprimanded heavily, perhaps even fired. The affair was too close to her professional life to ignore, and the potential damage to the company's reputation was just too great. Emma could already imagine the turmoil Lily would face, being forced to explain herself, losing her position in the company, and facing the professional consequences of what had been a reckless, selfish decision. After weeks of watching her revenge unfold, Emma knew it was time for the final confrontation. David and Lily had been walking on eggshells, their lives slowly crumbling under the weight of the damage Emma had caused. She had made sure to strike when they least expected it, taking everything from them, piece by piece, until they were nothing more than shadows of their former selves. But Emma wasn't done yet. She needed them to understand the depth of her pain, to see the consequences of their actions. She invited them both to her house for what she called a final discussion. It wasn't a dinner, not a meeting where they could make excuses or try to patch things up. No, this was the moment where they would face the reality of what they had done. Emma knew that David would come with his usual charm, attempting to talk his way out of this mess, and Lily would try to explain, to apologize. But Emma wasn't interested in words anymore. She had already taken everything from them that she could, and now, it was time for them to know how thoroughly she had planned it all. As they entered the living room, David looked more disheveled than usual, his confidence replaced with a nervous energy. Lily, on the other hand, looked like a ghost of her former self. Her usual self-assurance was gone, replaced by a look of guilt and fear. Emma sat calmly, watching them both. She had already exposed their weaknesses, and now, she would expose them to each other. "Do you know what's happened to you both?" Emma asked, her voice calm, almost too calm. "David, you've lost everything. Your career, your reputation, your marriage. You're left with nothing but the consequences of your choices. And Lily, you? You've lost your job, your standing, and your integrity. You'll never be the same. Your careers are over." David opened his mouth to speak, but Emma cut him off. "You can't talk your way out of this. There's nothing you can say that will undo the damage. The game is over." For a moment, there was silence in the room. Both David and Lily sat frozen, their faces pale, their eyes darting between each other and Emma. They were two people who thought they could have it all, and Emma had taken it away with nothing but a few well-executed moves. "Now, you both have nothing," Emma said, her voice low and steady. "And I'm done. I'm walking away from you, and you'll be left to pick up the pieces of the lives you destroyed." As Emma stood up, ready to leave the room, she saw the realization dawn on them. They were powerless, and Emma had won. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about regaining her sense of self, reclaiming the life that had been stolen from her. The past was gone, but she was moving forward. And nothing would hold her back now. In the aftermath of the emotional storm, Emma found herself standing on the precipice of a new life. Her plan had been executed flawlessly. David and Lily, once her closest companions, were now reeling from the consequences of their betrayal. They had been exposed, humiliated, and their lives irrevocably altered. Yet, as Emma walked away from the wreckage of her marriage, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe again. The emotional weight of the betrayal had been unbearable at first, but Emma's careful and deliberate actions had allowed her to regain control. She had taken charge of her own narrative, carving out a path toward empowerment and healing. The sense of satisfaction from watching David and Lily suffer the consequences of their actions had faded, replaced with an overwhelming peace. The revenge she had so carefully orchestrated had done its job, not just in punishing them, but in freeing her from the shackles of pain and resentment. As the dust settled, Emma moved forward. The career she had put on the back burner for too long became her focus once again. She reconnected with colleagues and old friends, rediscovering her professional ambitions and embracing the sense of fulfillment that came with hard-earned success. She threw herself into work, finding solace in her creativity and strategic thinking, something she had long neglected while trying to hold on to a marriage that wasn't meant to last. But it wasn't just about work. Emma knew that in order to truly heal, she had to rediscover herself. She traveled, something she had always wanted to do but never had the time for. Whether it was a weekend getaway to the countryside or a spontaneous trip to an exotic city, each journey helped her reclaim a part of herself that had been buried under the weight of her relationship. She found joy in the little things again, whether it was indulging in a good book, attending art exhibitions, or simply enjoying quiet evenings with friends who supported her unconditionally. David, on the other hand, was left to pick up the pieces of his life. His career was in tatters, and the damage to his reputation was irreversible. He tried, in vain, to reach out to Emma, but she had made it clear that there was nothing left to salvage. The emotional connection they once shared was gone, replaced by a deep sense of betrayal that no amount of apologies could undo. Emma had closed that chapter of her life with finality. Lily's life had also taken a drastic turn. The professional consequences of her affair had been severe, and her career at the PR agency crumbled. Her attempts to salvage her job were futile, and she was forced to leave the company in disgrace. Emma had watched it all unfold from a distance, not out of malice, but because she needed to see the full scope of the consequences of their betrayal. In the end, Emma realized that revenge had not only been about making them pay, it had been about reclaiming her life. Her true revenge was in how she rebuilt herself, how she chose to rise above their deceit and create a future filled with strength, independence, and new possibilities. With her head held high, Emma walked forward, unburdened by the past, knowing that she was stronger than ever before. The world was hers for the taking.